Welcome to Gemara Academy. In this class, we will learn Tosfos Dibra Maschel V'ibayis Eimol La'ilum Leitivshi. Let's begin by looking at the flowchart of the Gemara, so we can better understand what part Tosfos is coming to explain. So in our Gemara, it revolves around the presentation of two brises. One brisa rules that in a case where a person extended his hand outside with items in it on Shabbos, and the din is also lachzira, he can't bring his hand back in. And one says mutar lachzira, he's permitted to bring his hand back in. Initially, we wanted to say that this resolves the question of Abaya. Abaya asked, do we make a person's hand a carmelis or not? It seems that the brisa that says also lachzira is because we make a person's hand into a carmelis. When it says mutar lachzira, it's because we don't make the person's hand into a carmelis. However, the Gemara then went on to say that there's other ways of learning the two brises, and we won't be able to resolve the question of Abaya. One way is, the first way, just briefly, is that they actually both hold the person's hand is a carmelis. The one that says asur, because he extended his hand down under 10 tefachim, and that's a carmelis, he can't bring his hand back in. The one that says it's mutar is referring to that his hand is above 10 tefachim, and above 10 tefachim is not anymore a carmelis, rather it's a mokum ptur, and therefore he can bring his hand back in. Another way of resolving the two brises is that the brisa that says asur lachzira, both brises actually hold that it's not a carmelis according to this way. The one that says asur lachzira is referring to a case where the person extended his hand outside after Shabbos already began, and therefore we gave him a knas, not that his hand's a carmelis, a knas, since he did something he shouldn't have done, he can't bring it back in. And the brisa that says mutar lachzira is referring to a case that he extended his hand outside before Shabbos began, and therefore, since he didn't do an isser, although he shouldn't have left his hand outside, we didn't give him a knas, since there was no isser in the initial action of extending his hand outside. The Gemara then went on to say that from here it seems that we could resolve the question of Rav Bibi Bar Abaya. Rav Bibi Bar Abaya asked, if a person placed bread in the oven by mistake, on Shabbos, dough, and then he realizes his mistake, and he wants to remove it before he comes to an Isser Chatas, before it actually completes the baking process, he asks, do we permit him to remove it, which is an Isser? It's also to remove bread from the oven. Do we permit him to remove it before he comes to an Isser Chatas, or not? So the Gemara said, it seems that from the answer we just presented, that the person who extended his hand out at night, we give a knas to, and the person who extended his hand out in the day, we don't give a knas to, it seems we can resolve the question of Rav Bibi Bar Abaya. Because the person who extended his hand out at night, if we give him a knas that he can't bring it back in, and he's going to put down the item because it's too hard to hold, he's going to come to an Isser Chatas. And nevertheless, we left the knas in place. However, the person who extended his hand out during the day, when he's going to come to drop it because it's too hard to hold, he's not going to come to an Isser Chatas. And nevertheless, we didn't give him a knas. So from there we could understand that also by Rav Bibi Bar Abaya, just like here we gave him the knas, even though it'll lead to an Isser Chatas, we'll also leave the Isser in place, even though it comes to a Chiv Chatas. The Gemara actually expressed it by saying the following: From this that we didn't answer this way. What was the other way we could have learned it? We could have said that if a person extended his hand out at night, where then when he comes to drop it, it'll lead to an Isser Chatas, so we can't give him a knas, because we're going to bring it to an Isser Chatas. But if the person extended his hand out during the day, and he shouldn't have left it out, and there we're going to give him a knas, because even when he drops it, the consequence is not going to be an Isser Chatas. From the fact that we didn't explain it that way, that at nighttime there's no knas, and the day there is a knas, we can resolve the question of Rav Bibi Bar Abaya. And here in the Gemara, the point that Tosfos is going to focus on, but we'll see why we need the introduction that we mentioned up to now, when we get to Tosfos, is when the Gemara then goes on to say, the truth is, V'bayisem, if you want, you could say a different way of understanding the two brises. V'bayisem ala ilum loitivshit. Don't resolve the question of Rav Bibi Bar Abaya. And what are the ways? What's the way of learning the two brises? The brise that says asur lachzira, we don't permit him to bring his hand back, is because he extended his hand out initially b'mezid, so we give him a knas. The brise that says mutar lachzira is referring to a case that he extended his hand out by mistake, b'shegig, and therefore we don't give him a knas. So Tosfos is going to be focusing on this, whether we can be patient the question of Rav Bibi Baya or not. So the Gemara presented this third way of learning the two brises, and said, and now we cannot resolve the question of Rav Bibi Bar Abaya. So Tosfos will present two views as to whether we can or cannot resolve the question of Bibi Bar Abaya. Some girsayis say and other girsayis remove those words. So let's begin Tosfos in the flowchart form. So in the Gemara we presented a third way of understanding the two brises. It's actually the difference is whether it was extended out b'mezid or b'shegig. And we said you can't resolve the question of Bibi Bar Abaya. Says the Ri. The Ri says that these words, you can't resolve the question of Bibi Bar Abaya, have to be removed, because we could resolve it. How could we resolve it? He says, even though we have now a different way of understanding the two brises, so how are you resolving it? There's another way. It's unrelated to Rav Bibi Bar Abaya's discussion. He explains it doesn't matter if we present another way or another 10 ways or another 20 ways. It's unimportant. What matters is that this way was presented. That means from there we see that the logic and the correct svara to use when looking at a possibility of interpreting two brises, that one is in day and one is at night, our choice is going to be to say that when he extended his hand at night we gave a kanas, and when he extended his hand at day we did not give him a kanas and he could bring it back in. And we don't say the reverse. The Gemara said from this that we don't interpret it this way. That in the night they don't give a kanas because we don't want him to come to an Isser Chatas, and the day we give a kanas because no Isser Chatas involved. The fact that they didn't present that answer, rather they chose to say that at night they gave a kanas even though it'll lead to an Isser Chatas. And the day, even though it won't lead to an Isser Chatas, they didn't give him a kanas. The fact that they presented that answer is indicative of the proper svara, the way that they look at things. And therefore we could resolve the question of Rav Bibi Bar Abaya. Even if we present another 10 answers, this answer was presented, and from the presentation of this answer, we can see that the way, the perspective of the Bnei Beis HaMedrash, the way that they choose to look at things, that we would give a knas even when it leads to an Isser Chatas. So that's the opinion of the Ri. Then Tosfos goes on to present the opinion of the Rashba. The Rashba says, it seems we should leave the words V'yibayis eimel ha'olam lo tivshet. You cannot resolve the question of Bibi Bar Abaya. First he'll explain his opinion, and then he'll go on to address a question. So first the Rashba explains his opinion, which is the fact that the previous answer wasn't reversed. The fact that we didn't say at night there's no knas, it'll lead to an Isser Chatas. In the daytime there is a knas because there's no Isser Chatas. The fact that we didn't reverse it doesn't indicate anything. Of course we didn't reverse it. Of course we didn't reverse it. It makes no sense. Which basically means it's nonsensical for us to say that a person who extended his hand out on night with an object, on Shabbos, he did an Isser, doesn't get a knas. But if the person extended it out in the daytime, which was no Isser, gets a knas, is have a kuchuchavat lula. It makes no sense. We would never say such a thing. We would never have said such a thing. And therefore, from the fact that the Bnei Beis HaMedrash didn't reverse it and say that, doesn't indicate anything except that they don't say things that are illogical. And he goes on to say, even though when you look at it from one perspective, you could say, oh listen, in the day we can give him a knas, there's no Isser Chatas. At night, we can't give him a knas because there is an Isser Chatas. It makes no difference. The bottom line is, the result is something nonsensical, something illogical, and we would never say such a thing. So therefore the Rashba first says that his opinion is that now we can't answer the question of Bibi Bar Abaya. And the fact that they didn't present a reverse answer earlier is simply because they don't present things that are illogical and nonsensical. But now a question comes up. And the question is, then what was the Gemara saying earlier on, that now we can resolve the question of Bibi Bar Abaya? How can we resolve it? So Rashba explains, so how come earlier we said we can resolve the question of Bibi Bar Abaya? If the opposite way of presenting it is not an option, and they only said it because they only presented that way, because the alternative makes no sense, but it doesn't indicate the way they look at it, then why earlier on did we say we could resolve the question of Bibi Bar Abaya? So he answers very simply that earlier on we presented one way of what was happening in our Gemara. What was the build-up of our Gemara? The build-up of the Gemara was that we had the question of Abaya, do we make a person sound a Carmelist or not? So we thought we could resolve the question from the two brises. One brise says Asr Lachzir, one says Mutar Lachzir. So now we see, one says it's a Carmelist, one says it's not. So Gemara went on to say, no, it's possible that you cannot resolve the question of Abaya, because I can interpret these brises differently. One way of interpreting it is that they both hold it is a Carmelist. And then we said the difference, L'mayla and L'mata Masara. And then we said, or I can tell you they both hold it's not a Carmelist. And what's the difference? One's Mibayrin, one's Mishachashecha. So therefore you have no information about the bias question. I can say one holds a Carmelist, one says no. I can say both say it is a Carmelist. I can say they both say it's not a Carmelist. So there's no information about a bias question. However, if we interpret it one of the first two ways, we do have information about a bias. The first way is one says Carmelist, one says not. The second way is they both say Carmelist. But certainly one brisa holds it's a Carmelist. It's only when we introduce the third way, where they both say it's not a Carmelist, now we have no information whatsoever. It's either yes, no, two yeses or two no's. There's no information whatsoever about Abaya. So it's only when we presented the third answer that we were able to say, now we have no information about Abaya. So the Gemara is saying, no problem, you might not have any information about Abaya, but if you're going to go with the third answer, then you have information about Rav Bibi. Not because they didn't answer the reverse, but the bottom line is, the third answer is, that if a person extended his hand after the Shabbos already began, and it's nighttime, we're going to impose a knas even though it'll lead to an Isser Chatas. So from there we could see that Chazal won't remove their Isser even though it leads to an Isser Chatas. Now you'll say, oh, but maybe you can learn one of the first two ways. Then I'll tell you, oh, then resolve the question of Abayis, and maybe learn the third way. Yeah, not to answer Abayis' question, maybe there's the third way. So I'll say, oh, then you have to answer Rav Bibi. We'll go back and forth. Tosfos says, whatever the understanding for it is, we'll leave it for now. Whatever the understanding is, the bottom line is you need to choose something. And since in our Gemara, the goal is to say we can't answer the question of Abaya, then you have to answer the question of Rav Bibi. And that's why the Gemara says now, afterwards, then the Gemara says, but after when we present a third alternative, besides the first one that we thought resolves the question of Abaya in a specific way, and then the additional two, but then you're still stuck with either Abaya or Rav Bibi. Once we present another way, then we can say, now you can't answer anything. Loida Abaya, not Abaya's question. Loida Rav Bibi, not the question of Rav Bibi. Because now we have a way to interpret it that keeps us away from both of them. So to summarize Tosfos, the Gemara said by its third explanation, Rav Bibi, we can't resolve the question of Rav Bibi. The Ri says we should not have these words in the Gemara because we can resolve the question of Rav Bibi from the very fact that the second answer was presented is indicative of how to look at the situation even when there's an Isser Chatas involved, and that was presented. It's a done deal. It's irrelevant how many more are presented. And the Rashba holds that it's not indicative of anything because the reason we presented that interpretation as opposed to its reverse is because the reverse is totally illogical. And the only reason initially thought we could resolve the question of Rav Bibi is because we were stuck. It's either Abaya or Rav Bibi. So since we don't answer Abaya's question, then we have to answer Rav Bibi's.